It's the TMZ Behind the Bar podcast with the TMZ lawyers, Jason Beckerman and Derek Kaufman.
Hey, everybody, and thanks again for joining us on Behind the Bar. I'm Jason Beckerman.
And I'm Derek Kaufman.
And Derek, very exciting. We are plowing through these episodes. I think we have a great one today. I'm particularly excited about
A little
this.
bit of a kind of a redux, but new info.
Redux, new information. As we all know, Kim Kardashian's the people who apparently victimized her in that Paris robbery have been brought to justice.
Yeah, that's right. They're in handcuffs. So you all remember the great diamond heist early October
The
of
great
last
diamond
year.
heist of October 2016.
The October 3rd, 2016 diamond heist of Kim Kardashian while she was in Paris. They took a huge diamond ring, anywhere between $4 and $10 million diamond ring. We talked about whether that diamond ring will ever be discovered again. Well, now they've found 17 suspects. They've arrested 17 people that were apparently responsible, one of whom was the limo driver who shuttled her around Paris, and they've got them in cuffs. And so now many of these guys have rap sheets. There's actually some women involved. Many of them have rap sheets for forgery, armed robberies, counterfeit charges, drug trafficking. These are hardened criminals who pulled off sort of an La Mer 17, an Ocean's 17 of people that put together. That didn't go as well as I thought it would. I thought you would really like my French accent, but then not knowing the number 17 in French.
That was La Merde 17 is what just happened.
I see what you did there. Anyway, 17 guys are in cuffs. They actually have a lot of evidence. They've been building this case for months now. There's a very high profile. One of the things they have is DNA evidence that was actually on the gag that was used on Kim Kardashian when they bound her, threw her in the bathtub while they committed this robbery. So that actually came into play because some of the guys have old charges, so maybe are in a DNA database. But where do we all stand? This is now the beginning of the criminal case. We have some suspects. So what happens in America?
Well, first, my one takeaway from this whole thing is never do a crime with 16 fellow criminals because somebody's going to mess this up,
this
right?
is Goodfellas. Loose lips. You got Carbone ends up in the freezer. You can't pull up a heist with so many people because loose lips.
Right, loose lips, right. This is not quite the Lufthansa heist, but it's close. So, we're about to head into the criminal process. We're all sort of familiar, I think, from Law and Order or elsewhere with the way criminal process works in the United States. Somebody is charged with a crime. They are then arraigned, at which point they will enter a plea, typically a guilty plea or not guilty plea or at that stage.
Yeah, and this is a critical part, right? Because sometimes you have a plea bargain at that stage, right?
Right. Well, it could be at that stage or at a later stage. And I know plea bargains are a big thing that we focus on in this country. Everybody's aware of them, right? This idea that you can negotiate down the amount of prison time you might face in exchange for an admission of guilt. And in this case, turning over some of your fellow criminals.
That's exactly right. With 17 people, you are bound in the American system to have some of them do what's called turning state's evidence. They become sort of a patsy for the state and help out in prosecuting their fellow criminals, right?
And
so you come in and say, give me a lighter sentence because I wasn't the ringleader. This guy made me do it.
And we were joking about it earlier, but it is one of the great risks of doing a criminal enterprise with that many people that somebody is going to turn, there's a whole thing that, a logic thought experiment is the whole prisoner's dilemma. It's always better to admit the act than it is to try and hold out. When you have 17, the prisoner's dilemma becomes that much more simple. Basically, somebody is going to turn state's evidence and turn the group in.
It's cumbersome. The trust breaks down. This is also Goodfellas as well, right?
Yeah.
He squawks at the end and lets down all of his fellow mobsters.
So there's the plea bargain can happen at any stage, but you have pretrial hearings and evidentiary motions. Basically, say the prosecution or the defense will say this piece of evidence should be let in. The defense will say no, that piece of evidence should be excluded.
Why would you exclude it, though? What are the reasons?
You're all pretty familiar with this. It could have been obtained through unlawful means, unlawful search and seizure.
Poisonous tree. Fruit of the poisonous tree.
Right. It could be that the evidence doesn't really prove the crime, but instead it will just prejudice the jury against the defendant. We protect the defendants against the introduction of that sort of evidence. There'll be consideration of aggravating circumstances. What elements of this crime brought it out of just the traditional crime? In this country, we have, if it's a hate crime, if it's something that's done for a racial motivated purpose, that can be an exacerbating circumstance.
And this goes more to sentencing, right?
Yeah.
So when you have aggravating circumstances, was it a particularly heinous murder? It can result in the death penalty sometimes here or life imprisonment. We look at the same things in this kind of circumstance where we got a lot of aggravating circumstances. They tied her up, they bound her, gagged her. Those are aggravating conditions.
Right. Eventually, the case will be, assuming no plea bargain, it'll be eventually be submitted to a jury. A jury will be impaneled. There'll be a trial. The jury will eventually have to make a decision of guilt or innocence. We're all very familiar with this.
And of course, how are they building this case, Jason?
Yeah.
They are building this case around, it was a robbery in a private bedroom with
Yes.
Kim Kardashian. Who's the centerpiece of the case?
So Kim Kardashian's the center of the piece of case, and very interestingly, in this country, what would obviously have to happen is she would have to show up at a pretrial hearing to provide evidence. She would also have to show up at trial, certainly. She is the only one who can definitively establish that these gentlemen were in her hotel room at the time and date that they're accused of, and this would be, the onus would be on Kim, and she, and I assume, therefore, she will likewise have to travel to France to provide testimony at least once and maybe more times about each element of this crime.
Yeah, she's got to help them prove their case, the prosecutors. And those are those famous scenes where you point, that man did the crime.
Right.
That happens in the American justice system. You see it all over movies
She will
and
be
television.
she would be subjected to cross-examination. The defense attorney would say up and say, do you really, what drugs were you on? Were you in the right state of mind? Weren't you scared? Are you sure you can identify this person sitting here 1 year later as the exact person that was in your hotel room in October? Doesn't that seem far-fetched that you could have it? So these are the purposes of cross-examination.
They would chisel at that credibility.
Absolutely. But remember, the crime that was committed here was not in the United States, and so all of what we've been talking about may or may not be irrelevant because it happened in France. And Derek and I, we don't know anything about French law.
Frankly, I don't know much about American law, but certainly very little about French law.
So we have something much better than Derek and I pontificating on things we don't know, which is we brought in one of the true lions of French law, a gentleman by the name of Stefan Naumann. Stefan represented WB, Warner Brothers, our parent company. He also represents the European interests of basically every studio, every American studio that you all have heard of. He's a brilliant,
and
brilliant
criminal
man.
bona fides. He's represented
a lot
criminal defense.
Right.
Lawyer.
We're really happy to have him with us. The first question that I have for you, we are at TMZ. We are all Kardashian all the time. And you stationed there in Paris. What is it like that there too? Is your office just a buzz with news of the Kardashians on a daily basis?
To tell you the truth, no, not my office.
Well, now I'm deeply disappointed.
Sorry to disappoint you, but you will be excited to hear that it has been over the French national news and the French celebrity news very, very substantially, and in quite some detail.
So we've now had reports that 17 different individuals have been arrested, or at least on the verge of arrest.
They are arrested.
They are now arrested,
Yes.
relating to the kidnapping and the armed robbery of Kim in her Paris hotel room back in October.
Correct.
What do we expect to see next? What is give us sort of a couple of a minute here on the pretrial process that we can expect of these guys. They're in the States. We would see preliminary hearings and guilty pleas or pleas of not guilty. Is it the same sort of trajectory that you expect to see in Paris?
Actually, without giving you a mini course on French criminal procedure, it is radically different from the U.S. There are no pleas or bargaining with the district attorney, the prosecutor's office. It is mainly an inquisitorial process. So the investigation is actually led by an investigating judge as well as the prosecutor. There will be confrontations with witnesses. There can be searches, seizures. In this particular case, from the very extensive press coverage, I gather that there was video surveillance, there have been phone taps, and they actually did find DNA traces on the gag that was used on her, which led them to locate the first of the 17 individuals. And then they basically put them under surveillance for 3 months until they could unravel the whole group or network of people.
Wow. I want to pause for 1 second. You said that it's led by sort of the judge, an inquisitorial process. That's radically different than what we do here, right, Jason? I mean, it seems like our judges are sort of generalists that sit in the background and the lawyers fight it out. And
So we typically call it an adversarial process here. We have one side pitted against the other side, and you have a neutral arbiter in the middle of it, which is the judge. But it's very different in France, and I think this is true for most of Europe, where one side is sort of, the defense is going up against the judge and the prosecutor sort of acting in tandem. Is that right?
Actually, in a very small nutshell, the adversarial process in France takes place during the trial. where you have the prosecutor or the district attorney versus the defense attorney. But the entire preparation of the trial is led by a judge who's supposed to supervise what the police is doing and what the district attorney is doing.
Right.
And the role of that judge is to gather evidence. And it is actually very specific. He or she is supposed to gather evidence both of guilt as well as disculpating evidence.
Interesting.
And then the whole thing is turned over to the court, and then the trial, the adversarial part.
Sounds like a much less cushy job than it is here. Here, a judge is a plum job. You sit back, you listen to cases. There, you got to really roll up your sleeves, huh?
But these gentlemen will be entitled to a trial by jury, correct?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. And that is because not all criminal trials in France are by jury, but as you can well imagine, these are serious felonies.
Right.
In fact, when you all contacted me, I went back and looked at the French criminal code. In terms of accumulating aggravating circumstances, this particular gang basically accumulated nearly every single aggravating circumstance short of, bestiality and murder.
Well, the investigation is still early.
Yeah, I mean, let's not speak too soon.
Yes, you were asking earlier about whether Ms. Kardashian is a more or a better-known personality or celebrity here. Considering the amount of detailed information about the gang, about the investigation, about the facts that I've been able to read, I kind of suspect that the district attorney's office and the public authorities in France have been quite open about what they have and what they've done, in part as part of a sort of public relations angle.
Well, give us 3 or 4 examples of what is the aggravating circumstances at play here involving these defendants.
From what I've read and what we've known is they were disguised as policemen. There were 5 of them. Uh-huh. They were disguised as policemen. There is in the French criminal code a specific aggravating circumstance, which is to disguise yourself as someone who has public authority. They came in, they bound her, gagged her, and then held her at gunpoint, all of which are aggravating circumstances. They committed it in an organized gang, which itself is an aggravating circumstances. They, among the other aggravating circumstances, is if you actually bound or gag someone in order to escape or facilitate escape, that is an aggravating circumstance. And the list goes on. They apparently were wearing ski masks or something like that. The fact of dissimulating your face is another aggravating circumstance. And by the time you add all of these up, what these guys are facing under French criminal law is 30 years.
Wow. Which, in the States, we have very long prison sentences. We're accustomed to them here. We have these lifetime sentences.
Multiple life also.
Multiple life. Even for crimes less than murder, we often see life sentences. But my suspicion is that 30 years is an incredibly long sentence within the French justice system, especially when you do not have a murder at play, right?
Okay. Yes, that would be an incredibly long sentence. 2 points. Unlike the U.S. system, under the French system, you don't add up the sentences, i.e., the prosecutor will go for a single longest sentence. Uh-huh. So you can't get like 5 times life or 3 times 30 years. However, interestingly enough, in this particular case, one of the fascinating facts is the people who did this are not young. According to the press, the ages range from 22, that's young, to 72.
Wow.
And the guys who actually carried out the heist, disguised, tied Ms. Kardashian up, escaped on bicycles, their average age, 55.
So it may be a life sentence for some of them, for sure.
Well, if they are facing 30 years, that would be pretty much a life sentence. And from what I've read, these are all apparently well-known criminals. I don't want to say hardened criminals. So they've all got criminal records. They are known for this type of work or this line of work. And like I said, with all the aggravating circumstances, I wouldn't necessarily expect much leniency by the juries.
So one thing that's incredible to me is there's 17 people. This is the vastness of this conspiracy. Typically in the United States, you'd see a conspiracy on this scale. Some would start to turn state's evidence. They'd flip on each other. Some would take pleas for lighter sentences. Will none of that go on? They'll just all get their just desserts in the French system? Wow.
Yes. Well, that's because in this particular case, the system actually worked the way it was supposed to. So they got DNA evidence that led them to one person. Then they actually put them under surveillance for 3 months, and that way unraveled. Among the 17 people are not only the 5 who participated in the heist itself, it is also the network of people they have, which led all the way to Belgium to try to sell off the goods. So in those 17 people, which includes 3 women, including a 65-year-old woman, in those 17 people are also the fences and the contacts of the gang that carried out the heist.
Do you know offhand whether or not the diamond was recovered, the $10 million Kardashian diamond was recovered in the investigation?
I'm glad you asked me that question.
Yeah.
According to the press, what they have recovered is 1 gun and 300,000 euros, which is about $340,000. Now, the reason I'm glad you asked me that is because I listened to you all's podcast back in October, where you had the diamond expert explain the percentages that they could hope to get and how to get rid of a 20-carat diamond, and whether to cut it up and whether it's you can cut it up into a 19.8-carat diamond or you have to cut it into 3 small pieces. And I listened to that with great interest. And as it turns out, I believe 300,000 euros is actually consistent with the percentages and calculations that he offered on you all's podcast.
Our experts vindicated.
Thank you for doing that homework. I think our numbers on that podcast just doubled.
You are the most prepared guest we've ever had.
It was on October 6th.
Thank you for the plug as well. So one last question from my perspective. Testimony at trial. Kim Kardashian, I'm picturing her dressing up as Marie Antoinette with the powdered wig and the whole thing and having to march into a French courtroom and testify against the individuals who did this.
Tearful testimony.
Is that going to happen? Please tell me that it is.
Well, I think Ms. Kardashian, if she's listening, will be absolutely thrilled to know that she is under no danger. Unlike Marie Antoinette, she does not have to wear a wig.
Right.
And I believe that she will actually not be required to come to court. And the reason I say that is, according to the press, once again, in fact, the French authorities are so eager to show that they have done what needed to be done and to sort of repair public relations damage for this aggression in Paris, that they are apparently actually going to send over to the States the investigating judge to take Ms. Kardashian's deposition.
Well, hold. So I have this question. Does the defense, and I'm not even sure this will make the podcast because it's so wonky, but I'm curious, does the defense have an ability to cross-examine Ms. Kardashian in that context?
No, that's where you put your finger on the fundamental difference between an inquisitorial and an adversarial process.
Wow,
that is such a foundational right in American criminal justice, the confrontation of your witnesses. Yeah.
Right. Well, the confrontation, the way it works under the French inquisitorial system is the investigating judge can request, for example, the victim to come to a hearing where the perpetrator is present and he or she can organize a confrontation, which they regularly do in criminal matters. Mm-hmm. And then the record of that confrontation is what goes into the trial.
Fascinating.
That blows me away, actually, because it is one of the most important aspects of our system.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. To allow you to confront your witness in court, stare them down, make them uncomfortable. It's very, very jealously guarded here. Yeah.
Stefan Naumann, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. I think that conversation was pretty fascinating, Derek.
Absolutely. Thank you so much,
It was my pleasure. Thanks for calling.
Derek, that was all fascinating to me because you know what a lover of all things French that I am.
Oh, I am surprised you didn't bring up your Sarkozy story.
I know,
mean, you are the resident Francophile.
I know. But I have to tell you, the idea that the defendants don't have a right to cross-examine him. I mean, famously, people's memory of things fades, it lapses, it's wrong. I mean, good, God-fearing people testify inaccurately all the time because they just remember things slightly different than they happened. I don't know how it is that you place these individuals in this room and tying her up and exactly who did what, which Stefan seemed to suggest was important in terms of the aggravating factors. Who did what at what time? Who bound her? Who wore the ski masks? How do you do any of that without the witness, without Kim Kardashian coming to Paris to say, this is what happened, X, Y, Z?
It's unbelievable.
And then them to say, are you sure it was my client? Isn't it true that you had done drugs earlier in the night? All those things that diminish the veracity of any witness have to be done here.
I think it diminishes it in our mind because it is such an ingrained concept in American criminal justice, where you have the witness on the stand pointing out and saying, that guy did it over there. That is confrontation, and that's what the Constitution provides here. There, they don't think of it that way. Look, the judge gathers the evidence, I guess, and they pick up the circumstantial pieces, the DNA. They maybe depose her. It sounds like they go ask questions, but
the judge asks them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to wrap our head around a deposition without someone crossing that person and sort of protecting that witness or asking the questions that are contrary to the witness. This is more sort of just give us the narrative and let us know what you know, and we'll assess the credibility. It's very odd.
One thing I do know that we didn't talk to Stefan about was I know that the rules of evidence are really lax. You'll see in American courtroom dramas, I think Law and Order, sort of everybody's first step into the way criminal procedure works, is that there's evidence that you cannot allow in because it's too prejudicial. It's not relevant to a situation. I know that across Europe, and especially in France, those rules really do go to the side, go along, along the wayside. It's the judge has ultimate authority to say, you know what, I'd kind of like to hear that.
Right.
Or, you know what, I'm not really interested in that. I don't care. There's no set rules for what can be admitted and what can't, as there are here.
Yeah, in an American trial, we have what's called motions in limine, which is kind of wonky. But before a trial, all these pieces of evidence are presented to the judge and say, can we show this to the jury?
Yeah.
And the other side says, no, that would be prejudicial. That would taint them. They wouldn't focus on the real facts. We have to keep that out of the eye of the jury. There, it's a sort of a welcome mat. And before the trial takes place in America, it becomes just sort of theater at that point. You've sort of set the guidelines. There, it seems much more open-ended. The judge sort of runs the system.
And so ultimately, our system is based on the idea that it's better to let 10 guilty people go free than to find one innocent person guilty and incarcerate them. That's never been the European approach to things.
Sure, they're throw them in the Bastille and figure it out later.
And they put a lot more faith in single individuals to act in a way that they think is fit. And that's what's happening here. You're saying to the judge, you have incredible authority. Ultimately, we have a jury that's going to determine guilt or innocence, but the judge has incredible authority, much greater authority than they do here. Here, we put the authority in the legislatures who pass the laws that restrict the judge in the way that he or she can act. There, they give a lot of authority to the judge. They say, go for it and see what comes out.
Yeah, now there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, because it sounds like we maybe prefer the confrontation clause in American justice.
We're
used to it. We think that helps you get sort of at the truth more. One thing I do like about their system that Stefan was talking about is there's no plea deals. They got 17 people here, and it sounds like they're all going to face justice in some way. Yeah. In our system, people turn over evidence. You'll get a year here. Someone will do a very heavy sentence if they don't cooperate. That always seems less satisfying to me when you hear about the guy who turned on his friends. You don't know if he's telling the truth or just saving his own hide. There, it seems like everyone will be held accountable, and there is something satisfying about that, don't you think?
There is, and I agree with you. The one sort of counterpoint that I would make is that is a reality based on the sheer amount of crime that we have in this country.
It's an efficiency concern.
If you guys look at the statistics in terms of the crime per 100,000 people in the United States versus a place like France, we are 200 times more criminally oriented than the Europeans are. The number of crimes, the sheer number of crimes, and the amount of police that we have out in the streets, it is just vastly greater here. And because of that, we could never bring every single accused person to trial. It just, we would break down in a day. We need to have these efficiencies, as you said, in order to make the system move
There's
along.
your inner Francophile coming out.
I know.
You long for the civilized life of
Stay
France.
away from me.
That was great, though.
All right, time for mail time. Writing your questions and comments to behindthebar@tmz.com. The first one up is from Tabitha. There's a lot of talk about Donald Trump and this unverified document that BuzzFeed published. As it has yet to be verified, what trouble could they get in if it turns out to be false?
It's a good question.
Very timely question. We actually should have done today's podcast on this subject.
We really should have. What a mistake. But I love the name Tabitha, by the way. You don't hear that much.
So BuzzFeed is I assume when you're saying they get in, I assume we're talking about BuzzFeed.
I think so, yeah.
Or any other
news organization.
News organizations that publishes. They're a news organization. They are publishing a report about a famous person, the most famous person, the biggest celebrity in the world right now.
Yeah, they don't get bigger than Donald Trump. So
the legal standard that would be applied is whether BuzzFeed published this document and published these allegations either with malice or with what is it?
Reckless disregard for the truth.
Reckless disregard for the truth. You think I wouldn't practice this law on a daily basis?
So malice is one of those words that's thrown a lot in the law. You hear about murder is done with malice, a forethought. Malice just means you're doing it to screw over that person. You know it's false, and you're doing it anyway.
So Donald Trump, if he were to bring a lawsuit for defamation, which is what it would be against BuzzFeed, he would have to allege that BuzzFeed either knew what they were publishing was false, or there was such an overwhelming amount of evidence suggesting it was false that BuzzFeed had an obligation to at least report the other side as well.
That's right. You can't put your head in the sand.
That's right.
And ignore contrary facts.
That's right. So and the reason that media organizations in this country, the National Enquirer and others, are able to publish information like this without really a basis of known fact behind it is because there are such great constitutional protections. A very famous case, New York Times v. Sullivan, that set up this actual malice standard. It's almost impossible to overcome. I once saw it written that in the history of California jurisprudence, in the history of California civil law, there are maybe a handful of times when a famous person has successfully sued a news organization. That's an incredible statement given how much defamation
it's
is out
hard.
there.
Look, he's a very public figure. I mean, he's the most public figure I think you can be as president of the United States and a celebrity. I can't imagine someone who merges being so public, quite like Donald Trump. The interesting thing, too, is when you read the BuzzFeed piece, they are so qualified where they say this is unverified, this is potentially unverifiable.
Yes.
I've never seen such a qualified piece. My reading of it was, at some point, it's not even news if you're so qualified. You haven't told really your story yet. But they put it out there. I think it'd be a tough defamation suit for Donald. I really do.
Yeah, me too.
All right, the next one up is a comment from John. To fully clarify the use of "you're terminated" in the films, as Parker said, Arnold doesn't say it until Terminator 3. However,
Parker,
this is beneath you to have your mother write in to defend your error.
Sadly, it's not beneath him. So what Parker is trying to get at here by writing in a comment under a false name is that in last week's episode, you recall that Parker made the comment that
Arnold never actually said.
That we said Arnold never correctly said Arnold never actually said "you're terminated" in the Terminator movie. Parker said, actually, he did say it, and then about 10 minutes later said, well, we're not quite sure. And now he points out that it was said potentially by Arnold in Terminator 3, which is not what we were talking about.
Which, you know, the famous Terminator 3 that no one cares about.
That no one cares about. And
the
frankly,
one with the lady in red.
By the way, we were not talking about, and at the time. And also that Linda Hamilton may have used it in Terminator 1, which Parker had to be pointed out to Parker by somebody else, but that's also not what we were talking about. We're talking about if Arnold said it.
Just to be clear, Linda Hamilton didn't play the Terminator in the film. I just want you
Nor is she on The Celebrity Apprentice.
But anyway, go on with the rest of your question, Mrs. West.
That's about it.
I didn't even want to finish.
All right, guys, thanks so much. Again, obviously, check us out at iTunes at Behind the Bar, and we are on YouTube. You guys know where to find us there.
Yep.
Thanks very much.
Thanks
for watching. If you want more nerdy deep dives into the legal side of celebrity news, hit our subscribe button right here.
And check out our previous episode over here.